Welcome or welcome back to Trail and Ultra Running Training. My name is Will Frantz, and the whole goal of this podcast is to help you train a little better so we can have more fun out on the trails. And today I want to talk about some training intensity stuff. Made a couple disparate posts last week, and then I was going to talk about that, I think it was last Thursday. I don't know. Time has no meaning. But then I started ranting about supplements for 25 minutes. So if you like this information, I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe or follow or whatever on the relevant platform that you're viewing this. And if you have any questions, please feel free to shoot me a DM. And if you can just share it with people, that'd be great. I'd really appreciate it. So today, let's talk about different training intensities. I think a lot of the time we get stuck in training at the exact same intensity no matter what we're doing, or at least like close enough to the same intensity that we're not really providing different stimuli, right? Like if we are trying to get faster, then we need to spend some time running faster. I will say that a lot of the time, speed work kind of sucks, depending on what you're doing. But it doesn't need to be miserable. Like we're trying to thread this needle to where you're probably pushing at a pace that you don't want to be pushing at or working towards, but it doesn't feel that bad. And I mean, it feels bad, but it doesn't feel like you're about to die. And it also depends on what kind of speed work we're doing. So let's get into a couple things. Last week, I first made a post about hot take getting faster feels like shit. And it was a little off the cuff because I had just finished doing a VO2, fairly long VO2 max workout. Because that's what one of the big targets I'm trying to improve right now is my top end. I've been spending the last few months on volume and lactate threshold-y kind of work, and that has been great. I've seen a lot of progress. I've actually gotten quite a bit faster in this like middle range. But now I'm starting to get to that point that I've talked about on this podcast where my top end is starting to limit my like lactate clearance production, whatever, quite a bit, because training is, tent, house, whatever we want to view it. If you have a smaller top end, then your middle and bottom are also going to be completely restricted by that shitty top end. So that's kind of where I am right now in my training. And VO2 max work doesn't feel great. To be fair though, I also filmed that clip and then continued to run at an easy pace for 10 minutes. I didn't die in the person's yard that I was standing in front of while I filmed that clip. So that's kind of the thing. You're not trying to go to the point where you literally feel like you're going to keel over. You're trying to push it depending on how fast you are, a hard mile or a hard 5K pace. Traditionally, a VO2 max workout would be clipped somewhere let's call it 1 to 3 minute repeats with a fairly equivalent rest ratio. So 1 to 3 minute repeats with 1 to 3 minute rest 4 to 6 times or whatever, right? And these would usually be done at a 5K pace if you look that up. However, we have to remember that a high level 5K runner will do that in about 15 minutes. So for me, I'm much slower than that. So maybe target something closer to my mile or my 2 mile pace, whatever that may be. And that's going to be the stimulus I'm really looking for on this kind of VO2 maxi workout. Regardless, it doesn't matter a lot because the basic premise is push really hard, but don't murder yourself, right? We're pushing at a mile pace, but for maybe half a mile. You're pushing at a 5K pace, but if you're, a professional, 5K pace, but maybe for a kilometer. It feels terrible, but we're not maxing out. We're not collapsing across the finish line. So that's going to be our top end. And I don't think a lot of people do that. They don't thread that needle very well. And we see even more of this when we end up maybe lactate threshold work, where it's going to be a longer interval, typically somewhere between 5 to 15, 5 to 20 minutes, depending on what exactly you're trying to achieve. Lactate is a fairly wide zone, right? Zone 3 tends to be fairly large. So depending on whether working lower in that or whatever, it might be 5 to 20 minutes. But you're traditionally pushing for threshold work at like a hard hour pace, which is for a lot of people going for professional going to be a half marathon. For someone more like me, it's going to be a little faster than a 10K. But if we're looking at that effort, it's hard about 10 to 15 minutes in. Like, you're doing work, your legs are starting to produce lactate. You feel the slight buildup of hydrogen ions. All of these things don't feel great, but you're still breathing in a way that isn't, you can get out more words than just a single swear word. You can usually say a sentence. You can say a phrase. I think Steve Magnus ran the, I feel good, I feel great, I can still communicate, and then a decent gulp of air. Like, you're not working so hard that your lungs are wrecked, but your legs should kind of feel it, like a bigger limiter on our lactate zone stuff is going to be the byproduct of hydrogen ions, so you're going to feel them quite a bit. But your lungs are not going to be quite as taxed, right? So we need to know what that feels like. We need to put in that effort. And I think a lot of people just kind of see the interval and assume that they're going to go more or less all out for the length of that interval. So say you see 3 or 5 by 5 minutes or something, you're just going to try to kill yourself for 5 minutes and then rest for whatever period of time and then doing it again. And that's not advisable. We're not hitting the targets. We're not going to be seeing any ability to progress because we're constantly going to be digging this hole and struggling to recover. Because if you try to PR every week, you're going to never really make improvements because you're constantly going to be in the recovery trap. Now, I also see this on recovery runs, right? I've heard so many people talk about recovery runs, and if you're really new, they might not be real, or at the very least, it's going to be as much, if not more, walking than it will be running on your recovery run. If you've had a particularly fatiguing week and you're going to get out there for 20 to 30 minutes, that might still be true unless you literally make money on this sport. This can be true for almost everybody because it can be helpful. However, a recovery run often goes south because we don't feel like 20 to 30 minutes is long enough, and we don't feel like we can run anything less than a 10-minute mile. Now, for a recovery run, it very well may need to be the fact that you walk quite a bit, you cycle back and forth, you run a 12-minute mile, or say you can run a 5-minute mile, you run a 10. We're supposed to keep these really light. And a lot of the time, I think we don't believe recovery runs exist because we just don't actually try to keep them as recovery runs. We have these metrics in our head that if we're not running this fast or this long, it's a waste of time or not useful. But it's just not true. Anywhere from 20 minutes plus, hell, I'd even argue 10 minutes counts if you focus on form, because then we could use it as a neuromuscular drive stimulus. But 20 to 25 minutes where you at least start to get some mitochondrial development, you start to get some signaling, you get a bunch of blood flow, all of that's great. It doesn't need to be an hour. It doesn't need to be an hour and a half. It doesn't need to be this long thing. 2 to 3 miles is great. And it doesn't need to be a 10-minute mile. It doesn't need to be as fast as you can possibly run the thing. You can run it, and you'll probably get recovery. And this is the problem a lot of the time. When we look at the recovery run stimulus, we aren't actually trying to recover. We're letting our monkey ego brain push these metrics on our watch instead of just trying to go out for a nice trot and maybe stare at a tree. So recovery runs do exist depending on your background intensity, whatever. We just need to actually keep them low. And here's where we have run into this entire thing with zone 3 being the gray zone. Zone 3 is super valuable. Zone 3 provides a lot of training with lactate. It provides a shitload of aerobic work. However, it's also a little harder to recover from than zone 2. And like anything else, if you spend all your time training a single thing, nothing else is going to develop. And that's an overstatement. It will, because a rising tide raises all ships, but it's not going to develop as much as you want it to. And you're going to slowly create relative deficiencies, right? And this is where we've seen, and sometimes this is intentional, right? Like, as I said earlier, I've been prioritizing some of the lactate work over the summer. And part of that was just, I knew I wanted to be doing longer work outside. And because I love the sun, and doing longer work outside, lactate stuff tends to lead to that for me. So I tried to pair my running with I tried to prepare training stimulus with something I actually wanted to do, because I think that's how we'll often get the most out of our running. But now I'm being limited by that upper end, and it's because I've spent a bunch of time in the lactate space. I've put like minor signals to VO2 max. It's not that it hasn't gotten better. It just hasn't gotten better relative to how much other things have gotten better. And so we see this a lot of the time. This is where the whole gray zone stuff comes in. We don't believe recovery runs exist because we don't think 20 to 30 minutes counts, and we try to PR a 10K pace every time we go out the door. And then on the other hand, we aren't willing to kick it in the ass a little bit for our VO2 max work, because we don't want to feel that sensation like our lungs feel like they're about to just kind of half explode, right? And so we never hit the sides here. We're constantly center punching in this very narrow middle. And this is why Zone 3, an unfairly maligned zone of training, where we're producing a bunch of lactating and getting a lot of stimulus, has become more of the gray zone. Because if you just tell someone to go out and run, they're probably going to end up here. And if you spend all your time doing something, the other stuff is going to get necessarily neglected. So I think if we're able to, and this is not rocket science, it's literally polarized training, and yet for some reason we still struggle with this after decades of this information being out there, we need to just moderate the effort a little more, right? We need to expect that our easy runs shouldn't turn into a race. We need to not compare ourselves to every other person out on the trail or out on the road. You need to put in some lactate work, and that probably needs to feel easier than you think it does. And then when we look at the VO2 stuff, we need to work really hard. And there just needs to be this disparity, right? Without the separation between the work, everything all just becomes this messy middle of training that doesn't really provide much development. Then we wonder why we're stuck in this lack of progress year after year after year after year. So it really depends. I don't have this generalized advice where you need to do this. It's very much figure out what you're currently doing and see which stimuli you're failing to provide yourself, right? If you are the type of person who runs everything easy and hasn't felt like this on a run in a while, then we probably need to push that zone or zone 5 or zone 4 or VO2 stuff a lot harder or a lot more frequently. Whereas if you have never felt like you could have a conversation on your run, then we need to pull back and actually run easy most of the time, because that is going to be the largest chunk of your development. Appreciate the effort that we're trying to put in here, and appreciate that the effort, if you put in the wrong effort, you're going to get the wrong stimulus. And if you get the wrong stimulus, we're going to create a different adaptation, which might not be what you're looking for, depending on how you're training. So whether you're working from a training plan or with a coach, if you never actually follow the advice or recommendations and then you just feel stagnant, could be why. That you just don't actually do a bunch of the work. So we need to figure out what we need to do. And this is the same for the gym, right? We could talk about this across the board. So while I've been talking about running for a while, this also hits in the gym. If you are supposed to lift heavy, then lift heavy. I see this for runners all the time. They're kind of scared of weights, and I get it. If you've never done it before, like the big pieces of metal, but I will tell you that you put more stress and weight and tension through literally every step of your run than you do by picking up a barbell. Even if you're really strong, your lower leg takes more, my lower leg takes more weight through running than it has ever taken in lifting. We know this because I don't think I've ever heard of someone, I'm sure it's happened, but I've never heard of someone getting a tibial stress fracture from lifting weights. It happens all the time when we run, right? There's a lot of stress put through your system. Now, that's not to say do it with bad form. Form matters. Make sure you know what you're doing. Get a coach if you need to. Film it and send it to me. I like strength training. I'm happy to help you do it a little better if that's what you want to do. However, make sure that we're actually putting in the effort. If every time you go into the gym, you pick up the same weight and do 15 reps when you could do 25, then it's no surprise you're not getting stronger and that your injuries have stayed the same. We need to actually pick up something for 8 that you could maybe pick up for 9. Right? It needs to be difficult, just like the intense running stuff. Most runners, this is not you, that's fine, but I spend some time just practicing weightlifting movements at a pretty low intensity because I like lifting and would like to get better at it as a skill, much like I treat my running. That's not most runners. I don't think most people here are trying to PR their back squat or learn how to snatch over their body weight over their head. So unless that's the thing you're trying to do, then how about we pick some quality movements, get in, actually put in the work, and then get out, rather than going in there and really just kind of wasting time in a way that you could be running. Because when we don't put effort into the gym, this is where we end up with the problem that whenever you do sessions on or studies on lifting and runners, you don't see progress because they're too short and we don't actually put enough stimulus through the body. However, if you do go in there and lift heavy weights with good form, you will see progress and you'll probably see an injury reduction as long as you do the correct movements for what you need. So, if you need anything, please shoot me a DM or a message or whatever. I'm happy to help you. Please let me know just let me know how I can help. That's what I'm here for. I'm going to head to work and do some running. I have speed work later today, so I'm probably going to feel like I'm dying again because VO2 max work is not super fun. And it is pouring to a degree that, at least while I'm recording this, it's pouring to a degree that the roads are not particularly great to run on, so we'll see if I'm stuck doing speed work on a treadmill. So I hope you have a great rest of your day and have some fun on the trails. Thank you again for listening to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Just a reminder, nothing you hear on this podcast is medical advice, and you should always speak with a medical professional before making changes to your training or your nutrition. If you enjoyed the podcast or found it helpful, please leave a rating or review. It tells the algorithm robots that people like it, and that means more people will hear it. Or even better, just share it with someone who you think would benefit. If you prefer a video version, head to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Group on Facebook, or check out the Mountain Goat Endurance Coaching YouTube channel. Thank you again, and I hope you have a great next run.